welcome to Edison Open Forum Cannabinoids 2021. My name's Vivienne Parry. Now, legalization, increasing acceptance and demand for both pharmaceutical and consumer products mean the cannabinoid industry is booming. By 2026, the global market is estimated to be worth $60 billion, but biosynthesis could take it to new heights. Edison Open Forum asked the brightest minds in CBD what they think the impact of biosynthesis will be and what's next for their sector. With me is Trevor Peters, CEO of Willow Biosciences. Hello.
Hi, Vivienne. Thanks very much for having me.
Very good to see you. Now, tell me a bit more about Willow and what its mission is.
Willow Biosciences was formed about 5 years ago by a number of plant scientists who specialized in studying the cannabis plant, really with a view to coming up with a better way to manufacture and get at cannabinoids. The cannabis plant is generally difficult to grow at scale, and there are a number of molecules, cannabinoids that the cannabis plant produces that are really inaccessible through traditional breeding techniques, things beyond THC and CBD. And that's really where the concept of biosynthesis to produce cannabinoids was formed, and how Willow eventually got its start.
So you're swapping one biological process, growing a plant, with another biological process, which is engineering a little organism, a yeast, to produce exactly what you want. Still a biological process.
Yeah, absolutely, Vivienne. And that's really the crux of what we want to do. Mother Nature gives us some wonderful things, including the cannabis plant, but ultimately our goal as humans should be to try and leave her alone as much as possible. So biosynthesis allows us to do that. We engineer microorganisms, yeast in this case, for cannabinoid production. And by doing so, we're able to take, again, the wonders of the cannabis plant, but without the impact of ultimately growing fields or crops under greenhouse. We're able to do the same thing in yeast. And that allows us to be much more efficient in our process, use less energy, use far less water, and still ultimately arrive at the same ingredient or same product at the end.
Now, I've said that the industry is booming at the moment. Why do you think there's such demand for cannabinoids?
I think there's a number of reasons. I think, the industry, and you mentioned at the outset, $60 billion. I've seen estimates that the illicit market globally today is on the order of 100 billion. And so the market's been around for a long time. People have used cannabis for, there's evidence 10,000 years ago that the cannabis plant was being used. I think there's no doubt cannabis has medicinal properties. Obviously, GW Pharma's work to develop Epidiolex was very important in showing that. But just generally speaking, I think the understanding of the cannabis plant and its medicinal qualities, it's a highly regarded plant, and the stigma, frankly, around it is also being eliminated. And so it's driving the illicit market into the light, as it were, through what we're seeing now in Canada with legalization and deregulation in other parts of the world. And then obviously having new consumers understanding what the cannabis plant and its benefits are, really coming into the mix, is driving a lot of that interest globally in the plant and its ingredients.
And it's interesting to say about stigma, because it's really the stigma that has actually prevented the investigation of cannabinoids for medical use, which now seems to be flourishing.
It does. I think there's still impediments. I know in the United States, it's still very difficult to get access to cannabis plants to ultimately test cannabinoids for health and wellness purposes, even pharma trials. That's changing. It's definitely changing and going in the right direction. And yeah, the stigma it's absolutely been an impediment to advancing our understanding of the cannabis plant and our endocannabinoid system. And so researchers today still have a hard time getting access to cannabinoids. We've actually worked with some of those researchers who are studying the effects of cannabinoids on our endocannabinoid system. So it's coming, it's happening now, but it has been decades of prohibition, if you will, even for things like medical research.
So presumably you can produce using biosynthesis exactly the specific cannabinoid that a particular medical researcher wants?
Yeah, today, for instance, we're producing cannabigerol, which is the first cannabinoid that we've developed our biosynthetic process for. We're manufacturing it, small quantities, multi-kilogram batches, but we are producing it at just about 100% purity. So it is a very targeted approach. There's no or little associated cannabinoid production with anything that we do. And it's very easy for us to arrive ultimately at a highly pure product that, whether it's for medical research or for consumer use, it's a very consistent, very controlled process that allows us to produce that high quality ingredient.
And presumably you're then able to scale. I mean, let's say, you find that a particular cannabinoid has a very specific use, you can then scale up using biosynthesis in a way that would be very difficult with conventional farming techniques.
Yeah, that's again one of the great things about biosynthesis generally is their scalability is very straightforward for us. It's really the size of the tank ultimately that we want to work in. A 50,000 liter tank could produce between 5 and 10 tons of product per annum as an ingredient, and I forget exactly how many acres or square feet under glass that would displace, but it's a big number. And so when you think about the biomass waste, the energy usage, the water usage with traditional plant husbandry cultivation, it does present a real opportunity in terms of being able to bring large amounts of product to the market. And that's, again, goes back to my earlier comments, supply chain management, just being able to guarantee without having to worry about the vagaries of crop production, drought, things like that. It really does give a controlled process that can produce many tons per year ultimately of an ingredient if markets are there for it.
And presumably it also means that you can control, well, but in a plant you can't control it, the amount of the psychoactive, the THC, which is a big problem, isn't it? That you can't have more than 0.3% of it. So actually, yes, you're overcoming that.
Well, there's in the UK 0.3%. In Asia, it's actually 0. So limits of detection are very low. And for us, yeah, we're able to produce product that has absolutely no THC detectable in it. So at the lowest levels of detection we're capable of, we can assert that there's no THC, no psychoactive cannabinoids in the product. So it is very important to be able to do that for jurisdictions that have very low thresholds for being able to produce these products. And it's also important for the consumer to understand. There are many consumers today who use non-psychoactive cannabinoids like CBG or CBD, who frankly don't want to have the THC experience. And it's very important for us as an industry to be able to assure that customer never has that inadvertent experience.
So you could see that biosynthesis has big advantages in terms of both the ESG, the environmental impact, also has a regulatory advantage too. But I wanted to talk to you about where you see the cannabis industry going in the future, because at the moment we're all seeing this huge boom in CBD products, washing powders, dog biscuits, CBD impregnated underpants, which I saw on the internet. Is that bit of fad that's going to go away, but leave behind it a very vibrant new industry, which is much more directed perhaps towards, the recreational on the one side, but the pharmaceutical on the other side?
Yeah, and I think, Vivienne, there's actually space in between there. Pharma to us means clinical trials, long time to market. We think there's a real opportunity in the middle with what we like to refer to as the pharma OTC market, and even that's a bit strong. Cosmeceuticals, nutraceuticals, those are types of products that we see actually the biggest opportunity in growth. The recreational market is there today. It's enormous, whether it's in the US or Canada, whether it's in Europe. Obviously, the illicit market has driven most of that, and now it's coming into the light through legalization and advanced regulations around the cannabis industry. So that's a good thing. But where we see the most early opportunity with respect to truly health and wellness type products is with respect to other cannabinoids coming into the mix beyond CBD. I think CBD is great. It's got a fantastic place. But what we're finding, and we do ourselves small scale research with respect to the endocannabinoid system, is that cannabigerol, the cannabinoid we are bringing to market first, has some fantastic properties, especially in the use for cosmeceuticals or topicals. And again, being able to demonstrate this through research and showing the end consumer that there is in fact a benefit to using this product for inflammation as an antimicrobial agent. Cannabigerol is actually an extremely strong antimicrobial agent. So the benefits of it are becoming more and more obvious as the research is done. And I think that's the most exciting area for me, for our company, Willow, is the recreational market's great. Pharma will be 10 years out, but the ability to service the health and wellness market today is what's most exciting for us.
Now, are there any downsides to biosynthesis? I mean, I guess perhaps sometimes people don't realize that being a biological product, it can go wrong, batches can go wrong, but are there any other downsides? For instance, what about the cost of capitalization for building all the tanks and that kind of thing that you need?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure, one of the reasons, Vivienne, why we chose yeast as our host is the downstream infrastructure is readily available. So it's not as though it's a capital intensive process for a company like Willow. There are many good CMOs or contract manufacturing organizations globally that we can use and I say use, i.e. rent, to ultimately produce our products. There's obviously an operating cost associated with that for us, but it's not as though we have to start greenfield, build new tanks and begin that process. So it is easy for us to use third-party manufacturing to ultimately produce cannabinoids. I think when I look at the disadvantages to biosynthesis, one of the chief ones, which we're facing, frankly, right up front, is the capitalization of the R&D. So there's a lot of research, a lot of development work that still needs to be done. Biosynthesis, I would say, is still a relatively new or nascent technology in general. And as it's being applied to cannabinoids, obviously, that's also very recent as well. So the R&D side of it is challenging. It takes time. It takes, obviously, money, investment, and really bringing those products to market. It's a big impediment because there's a lot of risk in terms of the companies like ourselves and others in our respective space that are doing this. We're spending large dollars on research, and then obviously trying to wedge our way into a market that already exists today. So that, from my perspective, those are the disadvantages to biosynthesis. There's a lot of capital up front with respect to the R&D, but once it's working, it's a fantastic technology and a great manufacturing process.
So where is the place of biosynthesis in the future of this sector? Is it a much bigger part of the future, or do you think that they will always exist side by side with the traditional techniques for growing cannabis?
Oh yeah, there's always going to be cultivation for cannabis, whether it's recreational use or people who strictly want a botanically derived cannabinoid. Our process is still natural, very much like what happens or occurs in the plant. However, there will always be that consumer that wants something that came from the soil. I think where biosynthesis really shines, and I think there's a lot of growth yet to be had in the cannabis market. As I discussed earlier, the pharma OTC market, the nutraceutical supplements markets, cosmeceuticals. That's an area where today it's not well serviced, and it's not well serviced because the plant really is an inconsistent mechanism or way of getting at cannabinoids. And there's a lot of white space or room for us to work to grow that part of the business. It's an area where we see a lot of interest from big consumer companies who are keen, very keen to get into the space, but they're loath to go after a supply chain that's based on the plant. It's just challenging for them for a number of reasons, ESG being one of them. But also ultimately just the variability. They don't want to introduce new products unless they know there's a stable supply chain there. So I think those are all ways that the biosynthesis technologies can ultimately live side by side with plant husbandry. No doubt there'll be areas where we displace what they want to do today, especially when you're looking at coming up with a highly pure product from a plant. There's really no point to do that in a plant. The techniques in biosynthesis are much better suited to do that type of manufacturing.
So to conclude, in a phrase or a couple of sentences, can you tell us why Willow Biosciences should be the stock that potential buyers go out and get?
Yeah, I think the quick answer to that, I could go on, Vivienne, but we have the ability not just to do the research and development, but also the manufacturing. We are selling product today, so we're still a very strong R&D company, but we're also in the process right now of commercializing our first cannabinoid. We've also developed technologies that we think are going to be highly desirable by companies that are now entering this space. We've seen a lot of large consumer or ingredient companies entering the space. They're very familiar with biosynthesis. They use it for production of other ingredients in their portfolios. And this is a natural way for companies like that to enter the space or expand in the space if they've already entered it.
Trevor Peters, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Vivienne. Thank you.